Chapter 17. Through Another's Eyes. Virginia opened her eyes and sat up. The atmosphere was gray and the clouds overhead were dark and gothic. She rubbed the sleep out of her eyes and stood up to look around. Where am I? She was in the middle of a dense, foggy woods. The rickshaw was gone, the campfire was gone, and Nathaniel and Tristan were nowhere in sight. Charles! Charles! She cried out. Are you there? A twig snapped behind her. Virginia whirled around and saw a person dressed in a black cloak and hood, carrying a metal bucket, walking towards her out of the trees. She took a step back and reached for her dagger. Who are you? She asked timidly. What do you want? The darkly dressed stranger walked cautiously towards her as if not to make a sound. Virginia's heart began to race faster as he drew closer and closer. She drew her dagger. Stay away from me. The stranger appeared to show no fear, nor did he change his composure. Looking beyond Virginia, he walked past the timid girl to an olive tree behind her. With the bucket in his hand, he began to pour out a black liquid substance upon the tree trunk and the ground around it. Virginia lowered her dagger and just watched him. What is he doing? Hello, sir? What are you doing? A voice hissed out of the hooded man as he continued to pour out the black liquid upon the olive tree. Make the paths crooked. Make the paths crooked, jagged and crooked. Cut burning eagle in half. Cut burning eagle in half. Divide him in half. Divide him. What? Virginia took a step back. This guy is getting really creepy. I'm sorry, sir, but what are you doing? He slowly turned his head and focused two dark yellow eyes on Virginia through the shadow of his hood. He placed his finger upon his lips. Shh, they will hear you. Never slay a tree when he's watching. Always when they are asleep. Always. What are you talking about? Oh, it's too late now. They will never become one again. They already let us slip in. He began to chuckle maliciously as he lifted his empty bucket for Virginia to see. First, take out the olive trees, then the oak trees, then the rest of the trees. The trees must go first, then cut Burning Eagle in half. He turned his back to Virginia and walked past the olive tree and into the fog of the night. Wait, Virginia cried out. Who are you? A twig snapped behind her again. She turned around and saw hundreds of people slowly walking towards her, each dressed in a dark hooded cloak, casting shadows across their faces. They walked so gracefully that their shoes remained hidden beneath their cloaks. Each carried metal buckets in their hands. They moved through the forest like ghosts. Not a word was spoken out of either one of them, nor did any make eye contact with Virginia. They grazed right past her and vanished into the fog. Some stopped in front of the olive trees around Virginia and began to pour the same black liquid around their vases. Several stopped at oak trees to do the same. Others began to soak the roots of other random trees they saw fit, while the others continued moving like spirits past Virginia, deeper into the woods. Out of all the flocks of dark cloaks passing by Virginia, one stood out. He wore a burgundy red cloak and carried a wooden bucket. Gold trimming was laced around the edge of his hood and the bottom of his cloak. He walked elegantly towards her. Through the shadow of his hood, she could see a pair of soft eyes gleaming in the night and a warm smile on his face. He stood in front of Virginia, gracefully took her hand that held the dagger and laid a tender kiss on the top of her fingers. A warm chill ran throughout Virginia's body as the dagger fell out of her grasp and stabbed into the ground beneath her feet. She smiled at the stranger. He slowly removed his red hood and returned her smile with one of his own. He had long silver hair that trailed back behind his cloak and wore golden earrings in each of his lobes. His face was smooth, and his youth was not much older than Virginia's. The smile upon his face and the deathly, charming eyes took hold of Virginia so that her whole body went numb and warm simultaneously. She felt something like water beneath her feet. Looking down, she saw the black liquid she had seen earlier soaking into her shoes and the ground around her. She looked at the wooden bucket in the man's hands and saw that it was now empty. its last few drops dripping down upon Virginia's hiking boots. "What is this?" she asked. The man never stopped staring into her eyes, nor did the soft smile on his face wear off. "Poison." Virginia's eyes shot open as adrenaline rushed through her system. "Poison? For what?" Suddenly, the youth on the man's face dissolved away as his skin began to wrinkle and shrink around his cheekbones. His sleek hair dried up with age, his eyes withered away and sunk back into his head, leaving 2 black holes looking down upon Virginia as a wide grin revealed his rotten teeth. "For you, Cohen," he whispered. She looked around at the trees with the black substance poured on them and saw they had become rotten from the roots up. One by one, they all began to fall around her. Virginia panicked. She tried to run away from the scene, but was stopped by a bony hand grabbing her wrist. She turned around and saw the man in the red cloak seizing hold of her like a fastened handcuff. "Let go of me!" The man stared aimlessly past Virginia. "First, take out the olive tree. First, take out the olive tree. Then the rest shall fall around it." Virginia felt her ankles beginning to burn. She looked down and saw the black poison slowly fuming, eating away at her shoes and skin. She leaned down to remove her boots, but as soon as she touched her laces, the poison burned her fingertips like acid. The pain suddenly became more severe. Her skin began to peel off her ankles as the poison slowly crawled up her legs and burned without mercy. Virginia screamed in pain. "Stop it! Let me go!" She screamed louder. Her skin began to dry up and crack around her thighs. Her clothes started to age. Her fingers, hands, arms, and shoulders began to dry and crack. Her hair slowly lost its color and youth. "Let me go now!" Her voice sounded faint and dry. The skin of the old man grabbing her wrist dissolved into dust. All that remained was an ancient skeleton holding fast to Virginia's wrist with the same strength. It stared aimlessly into the dark sky as it cried its words in a haunting, ghostly wail. "First take out the olive tree. First take out the olive tree. First take out the olive tree. First take out the olive tree. Then the rest shall fall. Then the rest shall fall. Then the rest shall fall. First take out the olive tree." The skin on Virginia's face began to burn, crack, and peel. "Charles!" Instantly, everything vanished. Virginia looked around. All that was left was a barren wasteland. The man was gone. The people in dark cloaks were no longer there, and the mighty trees were nothing more than rotten lumber and stumps upon bare, damp ground. She looked at herself. Her skin and hair were back to normal. Her boots and clothes were fine, and the puddle of acid water at her feet was gone. "Where am I?" she asked herself. "You are in the barren wastelands of the dam," came a deep, gentle voice. Virginia jumped. "Who is that?" She began turning this way and that until she finally saw a man standing not more than 10 feet from her. He was dressed in white, shining brightly. His eyes burned like fire. A smile was on his face, tucked inside his bushy beard. A band of light strapped around his left arm all the way down to his middle fingers, and another just like it wrapped around his head. She instantly recognized him as the man Charles had been kneeling before yesterday morning. "Who are you?" His smile grew bigger. "Someone who has been waiting to be found by you." She studied his face. There was no anger or threat to be seen, only peace. "What do you want with me?" she asked. "Do not trust him," he warned. "Don't trust who?" she asked. "The king of the dam, the one who took your hand," he said. "Do not trust him. His wine may be sweet, but it is disguised with a poison not known to earth. Deception is his chisel." Just then, the man reached down and put on a coat of many colors. "Do not trust him." "What's your name?" asked Virginia. The man smiled and placed the hood of his cloak over his head. "Seek for me with all your heart, and you shall find me again. I will be with you through all that lies ahead." Virginia sprung up in her cushioned bed. A cold sweat made her clothes stick to her skin. Her heart raced rapidly, and her breaths became short, panting bursts. She pulled the covers down and looked at her feet. They're not burned. She looked over her fingers, hands, arms, and shoulders. They're not burned either. She pulled her long brown hair in front of her to see. It was still soft and full of life. Her breathing began to soften. She carefully laid back on the cushions of the rickshaw. Grabbing one of the pillows, she wrapped her arms around it and held it close to her heart. I'm here. She heard a twig snap outside next to the rickshaw. Virginia sat up and gripped the pillow tighter in her arms. She held her breath and listened closely. All was quiet for several seconds, which seemed like minutes. Another twig snapped, and the rustling of leaves sounded as if something ran back into the woods. She reached over and grabbed her dagger and belt. She quickly fastened them around her waist and threw her backpack around her shoulders. She crawled to the front of the rickshaw and poked her head through its drapes. She saw Nathaniel slumbering like a bear below the foot of the cart, breathing deeply. Around the corner, resting by the cart's wheel, was Charles, deep in sleep. She smiled at him. He stayed by me all night. Footsteps raced in front of her. Virginia raised her head. Before her, the path coasted along the tree line before reaching a small patch of loosely scattered pine trees, which was the first step toward the mountain. Squinting her eyes, she noticed a dark shadow running down the path, its cloak trailing behind it in the wind. Virginia got out of the cart and slipped her feet into her shoes, remembering to step around Nathaniel carefully. She bit her lower lip and tiptoed around the Hezekiahite. Oh, goodness, don't hit him. With one giant step, she leaped over the prince to the other side. She turned around and found Nathaniel still caught in a deep REM cycle. Yes, I made it. She looked into the distance and saw the man vanishing further down the path. She knelt and tied her shoes quickly, never taking her eyes off the direction in which the person ran. Completing her last shoe, she broke out in a full sprint down the path towards the skirt of the mountain. Who are you? The man made it into the cluster of pine trees where his pace slowed to a walk. He looked over his shoulder at Virginia, catching up behind him. He continued walking until he was lost in the large cluster of pines. Virginia slowed down as she came to the patch of pines where the path seemed to vanish. They created a maze around her. She weaved through them like a crowd of statues, constantly looking this way and that as she became turned around in their midst. A twig snapped behind her. She spun around, and a dark shadow passed behind a tree. She drew her dagger and ran over to the pine. She took a deep breath and jumped behind the tree, holding her blade out in defense. No one was there. The sound of pine needles and leaves swept by feet rushing raced past her. She turned and saw another shadow walking down a new path toward the mountain. Hey, she shouted. She charged toward the man. He stopped walking, his back facing her. Virginia dug her heels into the pine needle ground and came to a sudden halt. She stood no more than a few yards away from the tall stranger. He wore a cloak of multiple colors, with its hood drawn over his head. Slowly, he turned around and stared at Virginia with a pleasant smile. His eyes were radiating brightly, in colors of white, red, and gold, through the veiling shadow of his hood like a blazing fire. A warm, welcoming smile stretched behind his bushy beard. He took in a deep breath, as if to soak in her presence. It's so good to see you again, my Cohen, he said. Virginia was speechless. A peace beyond her understanding fell upon her. She slowly lowered her dagger at the sound of his voice. Who are you? His smile stretched wider. He turned around and continued walking. Keep to your journey, and you shall know. He continued to walk the path that he was on. Wait! Virginia shouted, holding out her hand. She charged down the path. The stranger fell out of sight behind a tree. Virginia ran behind the tree and stopped. The stranger was gone. Birds began to call out, and many sounds of creatures leaping and fluttering throughout the trees echoed all around her. She turned her head in every direction, but no one was there. Where are you? Where did you go? A hand reached out and grabbed Virginia's wrist. She turned around and screamed. She raised the dagger high above her head and brought it down in front of her. Another hand reached out and grabbed her other wrist, blocking the attack. Virginia! Exclaimed a voice. Virginia's pulse slowly calmed. She recognized that voice. Tristan. In front of her stood Tristan, grabbing both of her hands. Are you okay? He asked. Virginia gently retracted her arms. She buried her face in her left hand and dropped the knife from her right hand. Tears began to swell in her eyes. "I'm so sorry," she said, quivering in remorse. A forgiving smile crossed Tristan's face. "It's okay." She soaked up her tears with the sleeve of her cloak. "I almost killed you." Tristan leaned down and picked up her dagger. "But you didn't. It's okay." He handed back her dagger. Virginia waved her hand. "I don't want that back." "Two critical things you need to learn in this world, Virginia, are these. This weapon is not your enemy." He took Virginia's hand and placed the knife handle in her hand, and if you use it properly, it can save your life. This dagger is nothing more than an instrument. Good and bad people in Aniatha can use such a weapon for good or evil. Virginia sniffed and wiped away her tears again. "But I don't want to hurt anyone." "And that's what every warrior needs to have, a tender and wise heart. I believe you will be a great fighter, both in word and combat." "Combat? I don't want to fight." Tristan took a deep breath. "Neither do I, Virginia. But to remain alive in this place, I'm afraid you will have no choice but to fight to save your life and the lives of others." Tristan placed his index finger upon the blade of the dagger. "This dagger is not your enemy. It can be used for good or evil. Its owner is the one who chooses how to use it. What will you do with it, Virginia?" Virginia looked down at the dagger and saw her reflection in its blade. "You have the makings of a great warrior, Virginia, and I believe you will use this even to save my life when I'm not looking." Virginia smiled and sheathed her dagger. "Thank you, but I don't think I'm as strong as you make me out to be." Tristan smiled big. "Oh, no, I believe you will be." Virginia took a deep breath through her nose and let it out. "Whatever you say." Tristan crossed his arms. "So, what are you doing out here this early in the morning?" Virginia's mind came out of the emotion of the moment. "I was chasing someone that came close to our camp this morning." Tristan raised his head. "Someone came into our camp this morning? What time? How long ago?" "Just a few minutes ago. I followed him out here to this very spot. But when I got here, he was gone, as if he had vanished or something." "Did you see him?" "Virginia, I've been the only one out here all morning and never saw anyone." He held out his hand. No pun intended. Virginia walked past him down the path leading to the mountain. No, he was here. He was tall. He had a brown, bushy beard, like a mountain man, almost. He wore a cloak of lots of colors and weird patterns. His eyes were beautiful, unlike anything I've ever seen. They glowed red and gold colors. She turned around to look at Tristan. "Do you think I'm crazy?" Only a warm smile was seen through the hooded shadow of Tristan's cloak. "I think you're exhausted and in need of a good breakfast." "You do think I'm crazy, don't you?" "No, you're not crazy." "What makes you say that?" "Because, like any fool, a crazy person never stops to ask his friends if they think they're going crazy. They only think that they're becoming more enlightened. Asking if you're crazy proves that you have a clear enough mind to question if you're still sane or not, which means you are not crazy. You're sane." "Then what do you think is wrong with me?" "I don't think anything is wrong with your mind, Virginia. However, I do think you need some good nourishment to help start your day off better." He reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. "Come, let's go back to camp. The sun will be up soon, and we will begin our journey shortly after that." Virginia felt Tristan's hand escort her back toward the camp. She turned around slowly, looked over her shoulder at the path to the mountain behind her, and then focused on the road ahead. She crossed her arms and wrapped her green cloak around her. She looked up into the pine trees and the wood's deepness to her right, on the other side of Tristan. Virginia stopped in her tracks. "What's that?" Tristan looked in the direction she was gazing. "What do you see?" Virginia walked past Tristan to the edge of the woods. Standing small, but strong in the blue glow of the early morning was a little sapling growing amongst the mighty pines. She knelt down and gently touched its leaves with her fingers. "This. What kind of tree is this?" She looked up at the trees towering above her. "It's not a pine. What kind could it be?" "It's an olive tree," said Tristan. He came and stood beside Virginia. "They used to be the tree that united the northern and southern woods of Earth stars. They also used to be the tree that united the woods of Earth stars with the woods of Amya. Sadly, sometime after the Great Division, they became very scarce." Tristan touched the leaves of the sapling. "I've never seen one grow in these parts of the southern woods before. They were more along in the Morayshire Valley." Virginia looked up at Tristan. "What's the Morayshire Valley?" "It's the land where the northern and southern woods of Earth stars meet. Once it was full of lush green woods, and near the shoreline in its area sat a beautiful little village. However, since the Great Division, it's been nothing but a barren wasteland. No trees, no village, no inhabitants or wildlife of any kind. Just a muddy marshland of roots from trees that once used to be there years ago. Why is that? Long ago, an attack was placed upon the Morayshire Valley by the witches of Scal Gal Mudarets. The story goes that one evening, while the tribes of the woods were asleep, they arose a stealth attack by the workers of darkness, the witches of Rachnana. They came with buckets of poison mixed with sweet nectar and began to pour them on the trees of the Morayshire Valley, knowing that they would drink the poison because of the nectar. Once they did, the trees began to die off one at a time. Once the trees were gone, the Morayshire Valley, the one last thing standing to hold the disgruntled tribes fast to each other, came to ruin. Afterward, the witches of Scal Gal Mudarets and the forest phantoms attacked the tribes of the woods that followed Oralmuti. It was the second greatest battle that Aniatha had seen since the Great Division. First take out the olive tree, and then the rest shall fall. Virginia rose off the ground. Did they first poison the olive trees? A surprised look hit Tristan's face. Yes, they did. Why? What's the importance of the trees? The trees are the guardians of the woods. They fight for Oralmuti. Well, some of them do. If you notice, some of the trees around us proudly display their loyalty to Oralmuti by showing the red that Al-Yamin himself painted on them around their trunk. If you remove the trees, the darkness slowly creeps in to take over the land and the people of the land. Virginia suddenly remembered the oak tree that saved her life when Darkrai almost took her. The chief of the Naomi also told me that they fight. The chief is right. They do. Sadly, over the years, the trees withdrew into what most described as some kind of hibernation and lost all interest in the war that wages on around them. Few, very few, care enough to fight for Oralmuti, and even fewer care to even remember the waters of Aniatha. They don't even remember the sweetness of the refreshing drink the waters would bring them. They once danced and fought. Now most just stay out of the fight, while the trees that choose the darkness fight and cast their seeds instead. But things are beginning to change. How are things changing? Ever since you came to this land, a new life has sprung up within Aniatha, a life like never before seen or heard of since ancient times. The trees of the woods of Amya and earth stars alike began to stir. Some began to sing songs. Reports of some fighting for the tribes of Oralmuti have spread throughout the land. Reasons say an old light that once left Aniatha has now returned to her people. Tristan's face grew excited. Virginia, it's you. You're the one I grew up reading about. You're the one that will restore the passion and the fire that this world is missing. Don't you dare say that I'm Rose Cohen. How? How will I be the light that these people need? Because you will be the one that will unite the land and the people of Oralmuti again. It will be through you, Virginia. Tristan placed his fist on his heart. I believe it. Tristan, this is no disrespect to you, began Virginia, but I really, really think you have the wrong person. What good could I possibly be to this land? Tristan walked past Virginia down the path toward the mountain. Come and see. Virginia followed him to see what he had to show her. The path led out of the pine woods and turned into a gravel dirt pathway that began to slope sharply. Virginia felt her calves starting to burn. She arched forward and used her hands to help steady herself against the treacherous path. She looked over her shoulder and saw that her head was level with the tops of the pine trees. She fastened both straps of her backpack tighter around her shoulders. Tristan, she panted. How much farther? Tristan stood tall, not arching over nor showing any sign of strain. Not much. The path bent to their left, around a large boulder, and then ran along the side of the mountain. Tristan soon escaped Virginia's vision as he rounded behind the large boulder. Tristan, she panted hard. Tristan, wait. Wait up. Don't leave me behind. Virginia began to balance more of her weight on her palms, crawling with all her strength up the last few feet to the large rock. A pair of leather boots caught her attention. She looked up and saw Tristan standing before her, holding out his hand. See, he said, I told you that you are a warrior. She rolled her eyes and smirked. She placed her hand in his, and with a firm tug, Tristan pulled her up on her feet. Place your hand against the rock, he said, slapping his hand against the boulder. She placed both hands upon her new support and leaned against it as they rounded the path. After passing the boulder, they walked along the trail as it ran around the mountainside. Tristan walked to the path's edge and stretched his hands over the horizon. "Look at what is before you, Virginia Singerman, and tell me what you see." Still trying to catch her breath, Virginia walked closer to the edge and looked at the scene through the gray and blue contrast of the early morning light. She could see the camp where Charles and Nathaniel slept below her. Spreading like an orange, red, and yellow blanket, as far as the eye could see was an endless sea of trees of all kinds. To the left was the Great Canyon, with its misty black pit and sharp, jagged rocks spiking out of its bed like mountains. To the far northeast, she saw a mountain region that stretched over the eastern horizon and continued to the north. "What do you see before you, Virginia?" asked Tristan. Virginia crossed her arms, wrapping her cloak tighter around her. "Well, the sun hasn't peeked over the horizon yet, so it's still a little bit dark." "I know," said Tristan, smiling. "I see that too. But look closer. What do you see?" Virginia squinted her eyes, using the small amount of light she had to paint the scene as clearly as possible. "I see trees. Everywhere there are trees. Some evergreen and some with autumn leaves on their branches." She pointed to the northeast. "There are some mountains over there." She pointed to the west. "And that's the Great Canyon. But those are all the surprises I can give you." "Virginia, all this land that you see once was one. Both sets of woods, the woods of Amia and the woods of Earth Stars, were one. They fought as one against the darkness. People trying to escape the darkness would flee into the borders of Earth Stars or Amia to seek refuge and safety. But the darkness of Skal Galmudrets saw the weakness of the warriors of these two great woods. So they promised them something, claiming it to be better than what Oral Muti had for them. And because of this, they fell. First, they divided the waters of Aletheia, and with them trapped and out of the fight, the rest of the tribes of the Earth Stars fell into disillusionment and division amongst themselves. Virginia hugged herself tighter. A cold shiver ran down her spine. "First, take the olive tree, and the rest shall fall around it." I still don't understand what makes me so special about all of this. It sounds like they simply need to get what Oral Muti gave them, and then use it to strike back. Tristan pointed at Virginia and grinned big. "Exactly." Okay, that was startling. "Okay, then how is this done?" "The people of Amia, and every tribe of Aletheia has a people, or an individual that is a priest. Even Skal Galmudrets has its own priest and prophets and kings, but so did the people of Amia. It was through the tribe of priest of Amia that the waters of Aletheia got the power of their fire and wings, and it was through them that it was given to the tribes of the woods of Earth Stars. But this didn't just come through the priest of Amia alone. It was first given through a servant within their midst. Through him came the fire of Oral Muti, then to the rest of the people of Amia, and then to the rest of those outside of the people of Amia that chose to follow King Elyamin. So why don't they simply use this fire then? This fire is not just something that is merely given and used. It is a power that demands that one be fully devoted to Elyamin and Oral Muti. Like the priests, the people had to sacrifice to remain in this fire's fullness. This sacrifice was a sacrifice of their time and life for Oral Muti, something they did not want to give up. Once they found another fire, through the deception of Skal Galmudrets, the people chose to seek out that fire and power instead. All they found, however, was a cold stab in the back and a weight to keep them from flying. Okay, that's great, and slightly confusing and all, but I still don't see how I'm the one who will restore this land. Tristan leaned back. "Virginia, do you even know who you are?" "Tristan, don't say it." "I'm just Virginia Singerman." Tristan shook his head. No, you're not." Virginia rolled her eyes and threw her arms down by her sides. "Okay, who am I?" Tristan turned his head sideways and looked at her. "Wow, Charles was more strict than I thought. He never told you, did he?" Virginia became frustrated. "No, and I better get some answers out of you. I'm sick and tired of all this waiting, and you must go to the city of Gaal to get your answers game. I'm sick of it. My whole life back home has been turned upside down because of this place, and I need at least some answer as to why." A soft wind began to blow upon the mountainside. Tristan raised his head and looked down into the valley. Uriah flew off his shoulder and across the treetops. The forest branches below them began to shake and swoop like a single wave that surged closer and closer toward their camp. Tristan held out his hand and whispered, "Virginia." "No way. Not anymore. I'm going to get this out, and I'm going to get some answers." "You're right," whispered Tristan. "You will, but for now." "Shh." "Do what?" Tristan jumped over and placed his hand over her mouth. Using his weight, Tristan fell to the ground, pulling Virginia down with him. They both rested on their sides, looking at each other. Tristan placed his finger up against his lips. He slowly took his hand off Virginia and crawled to the edge of the cliff. Virginia's heart began to race. "Tristan," she whispered. "What is it?" Suddenly, the dove flew over the cliff's edge and landed in front of them. It hopped over to Tristan and stuck its beak close to his ear. Uriah hopped over the edge and flew down over the trees once again. Virginia gripped Tristan's arm and spoke as softly as she could. "Tristan." Tristan looked at her. "They're back." Worry filled Virginia's eyes. She lay close to the ground, her chin grazing the path beneath her. With her other free hand, she gripped the gravel into a tightening, trembling fist and firmly closed her eyes. "No," she pleaded. "Please, no." Tristan unstrapped his bow from the quiver behind his back. "Not to worry. We will be okay, but this time is going to be a bit more difficult." Virginia's hands shook as she gripped Tristan's arms tighter. How could they possibly become more difficult than they are now? Tristan placed his finger over his lips. "Shh, they can hear very well." He peered over the edge of the cliff. Uriah shared that Aniatha is joining their hunt this time. The woman police officer? Why is she here? I thought we lost her. I thought Darkcry would have sent her home by now. Tristan pulled an arrow from his quiver and attached it to the string of his bow. "No," he laughed. "Knowing what's at stake here, she wouldn't miss leading this for the world. But Darkcry and Aniatha are betrothed, aren't they? I thought he would be leading this mission." Tristan gently brushed Virginia's grip off his arm with his bow and sat up on one knee. "True, they are. But he doesn't lead her. She rules him." Virginia peered over the edge down into the valley. "Where are they? I don't see them." "Listen to the wind and watch the trees." Virginia looked closely and saw the tree limbs of the pines begin to shake like a massive wave coasting closer to their campsite below. A cold draft came up from the forest and hit Virginia's face. The trees began to shake around the campground, and then slowly everything became still and quiet, like the eye of a storm. Tristan drew the arrow back to his cheek. Time to wake up the party. Neither Soaring Eagle nor Nathaniel, especially Nathaniel, enjoys surprises early in the morning. Tristan released the arrow, sending it whistling down into the campground. Virginia's eyes became transfixed on the arrow as it flew into the center of camp. "Stop! What are you doing? You'll hit one of them!" Tristan placed his hand over her mouth. "Shh, trust me. I won't hit them. It's a warning sign. We've done this countless times before. They'll know what to do." Charles rested his head on his folded war shirt like a pillow, falling in and out of his sleep. The morning lights were dim and the colors were fuzzy. He looked down past his feet where Nathaniel slept like a grizzly bear, holding tight to the handle of his hammer. He looked back at the campfire as it smoldered down slowly into small embers. "Oh, Tristan," he mumbled, "you forgot to place another log on the fire." He let out a big yawn. "Where are you, An arrow fell out of the sky, piercing into the ground, inches away from Charles's nose. Charles's eyes widened. "Oh no." He grabbed his sword resting beside him and jumped out from under his blanket. Instantly he ran to the rickshaw, but found it empty. "What?" he stuttered. "Virginia, where are you?" A faint whistling sound drew closer and closer to Charles. Another arrow fell out of the sky, nailing it into the wooden frame of the rickshaw. Charles looked up at where the arrow was launched and saw a figure ducking behind the rocks on the mountainside, waving a bow in the air. Charles looked at the arrow lodged into the rickshaw and breathed a sigh of relief. He's got her. Tristan's got her. Something stirred in the trees. Charles's breaths became more focused. He looked over his shoulder as someone stepped through the foliage behind him. "Where is she?" Soaring Eagle, said a familiar voice. Charles turned around to face him. "I didn't give her up before, Darkcry. What makes you think I would give her up now?" Darkcry stood at the wood's edge, looking at Charles with a malicious grin. "I think you'll find this situation more compelling, old friend." Charles strapped his sword around his back. "Another one of your devilish schemes or something?" "You could say that." Darkcry reached down and grabbed the handle of his sword. "But I'm not leading the attack this time." Charles looked out of the corner of his eye and saw 5 Indian warriors dressed in long black coats, dark buckskin pants, and breechcloths walk out of the woods behind the rickshaw, swords drawn. Charles slowly walked away from the cart to the opposite side of the fire as the 5 warriors surrounded Nathaniel as he slumbered on the ground. "Oh yeah?" marked Charles. "Have you run out of ideas?" Darkcry became enraged. His face turned flush red as his grip tightened on the handle of his sword. "You're one to talk. You've done nothing but flee this whole time. You and your tribe are weak. You'll never become what El Yamin said you would be, and that prophecy, it will never be you. Never. That's not up for you or me to decide. It's all up to Oral Muti." "No. Oh, no, old friend." Darkcry slowly drew his sword. "It's up to us to decide. Not you, not Oral Muti, not even Cohen herself. It's up to us." A warm heat wave swept through the campsite and grew stronger by the second. Charles began to sweat, but his focus did not deviate from Darkcry's angry eyes. "She's coming, isn't she?" asked Charles. Darkcry smiled. "You should have picked a different girl, Soaring Eagle, as I did." The leaves of the trees began to dry and wither. The bark upon the branches started to smoke. The darkness of the woods slowly faded as a deep red glow began to permeate from the woods behind Darkcry. Charles, Darkcry, and the 5 Indians around Nathaniel started to sweat as the heat intensified. Charles reached down, picked up a pine cone off the ground, and tossed it up and down in his hand, like a baseball. "It's unfortunate, Darkcry, to see you cower under such a woman. You truly are running out of ideas, aren't you?" Darkcry pointed the end of his sword at the 5 men around Nathaniel, giving them orders in a different language. Obeying their leader, they held their swords up high, pointing downward at Nathaniel, and awaited their order to strike. "You have no room to talk, son of Leaping Bird," barked Darkcry. "You're backed into a corner. Her fires are devouring the woods. The Great Canyon blocks your retreat to the west, and you will never climb the mountain in time to reach the bridge. Tell me, what is your grand plan?" Charles caught the pine cone in his hand. "This." He drew his arm back and threw the pine cone like a fastball at Nathaniel's foot. The grizzly's eyes widened. "I'd watch out if I were you," warned Charles. Not more than a split second after Charles spoke, Nathaniel's grip tightened around the handle of his hammer. Sky rocketing from his bed, he swung the club around him like a helicopter blade, releasing a horrifying battle cry. All the soldiers around him were sent flying in every direction. Some fell back with broken legs and arms, while others were thrown into the trees. One soldier was hit in the back by the club and fell to the ground. Without a second thought, Nathaniel grabbed him by the arm and threw him at Darkcry. The Indian flew like a rag doll before smashing into his leader, knocking them both to the ground. Nathaniel stood tall, gripping the handle of his hammer with both hands. His veins popped out of his arms and chest as the blood rushed through his body. His breaths were short, his heart raced inside of him, and his eyes widened with shock. Charles began laughing. "Nathaniel, that was beautiful." Nathaniel shook his head as if to come out of a dream. "What? What happened?" Charles laughed harder. "You were amazing. That's what happened." Nathaniel looked at Charles. "Soaring Eagle, what did I just do?" "Brother, you just clubbed 4 phantoms into the woods with a single swing and hurled another one at Darkcry himself." Nathaniel looked in front of him and saw Darkcry tossing his soldier off him. He rose to his feet, his face red with anger, growling and cursing at Nathaniel and Charles. Nathaniel gripped his hammer tightly again, fixing his eyes upon the devil in front of him. "Does the mutt want to fight?" "No, Nathaniel," said Charles. "Leave him to me. You need to go help Tristan escort Virginia to the bridge." "Where are they?" "They've already made their way up the path. Go help them. They'll be needing you." Nathaniel looked at Charles. "Are you sure you'll be okay?" "Yes. I'll be joining you all in a moment. I'll hold him off until you reach the top. Tell Tristan to sound the trumpet once you've made it." Nathaniel grabbed their satchels off the cart, slung them around his shoulder, and slowly started walking backward. Charles picked his war shirt off the ground and tossed it to Nathaniel. "Take this with you, please. I don't want to lose it in the fire." Nathaniel caught the shirt and stuffed it into one of his satchels. "Where are you going, traitor of the Hazakayamites?" taunted Darkcry. "After all, it was your ancestors who became the traitors, right? I always get that story mixed up." Nathaniel's face tightened with anger as he glared at Darkcry. "Nathaniel," said Charles in a firm voice, "don't. He's just getting to you. Go. Cohen needs you." Nathaniel saw the seriousness in Charles's eyes. A battle cry sounded. Charles turned around to see Darkrai charging at him, raising his weapon above his head. Charles drew his sword from behind his back and brought it down in front of him just in time to block Darkrai's strike. Both blades collided in a loud, thunderous quake. They held strong hiking stances as they pressed against each other. "Go, Nathaniel!" yelled Charles. "Now!" Nathaniel wanted to stay and help his friend, but after seeing the fury in Charles's eyes, he charged down the path to the skirt of the mountain. An unmatchable strength fell upon Charles, and with a mighty shove, he pushed Darkrai off him. Darkrai held his blood-stained sword out in front of him. "Still strong, soaring eagle. Still strong." Charles drew his sword back, ready either to defend or attack. "But still not smart enough," continued Darkrai. "Take a look around you. You knew I was never the leader in this attack. So where does the true fight really lie?" Charles looked around him and saw the fire from the woods had already progressed from its origin to the mountain's base. His hope began to weaken. Darkrai let out another battle cry. Charles turned his head around and swung his sword in front of him, parrying another one of Darkrai's blows. He twirled his sword and brought it down upon his foe. Quickly, Darkrai leaped backward, dodging the attack. Seizing his chance, Charles turned around and charged down the path to the mountain. With unnatural speed, Darkrai raced after him and lunged into the air, landing in front of his opponent. He drew his sword back and swung it at Charles. Charles raised his sword again and brought it down upon the monster, blocking his way. Both metals collided with a loud clap of thunder. Darkrai began to push against Charles's strength. "You will not save her, Soaring Eagle. Aniatha is about to cut your friends off their path. Even if she has to engulf the entire mountain, you will watch as her fires devour Cohen's corpse."
This is the end of Chapter 17. Tune in next Thursday for Chapter 18. If you'd like to listen to the next chapter ad-free ahead of everyone else, then subscribe to Early Access and tune in on Sunday. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe and share with your friends and family. It really helps the show. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major podcasting platforms. What Shines with the Dawn was written and created by C. Taylor Eason. Copyright Christian Taylor Eason, 2024.